This recording is going to cover the process of building and texturing what is referred to as the broken archway. I'm going to first get started by setting my project. So I go to File, Set Project, and you'll see that it's going to go to my default folder that I typically go to. You can locate wherever you put your template files on whatever device that is. For me, it happens to be right here. I'm going to double click on the broken archway folder until I see all subsequent yellow folders located, and then press the Set button. When I go to File, Save Scene As, it should automatically go to the Scenes folder. However, if it does not, make sure you double click on the Scenes folder and save your file to this location. So I'm going to refer to this as my broken archway -1. It's going to be my first version. You'll see that I've got several other files inside of here that I've utilized before or are data files that came with the textbook. However, it's best to start from scratch so that way you know how to build the scene directly from scratch. The next thing I'm going to do is create myself a polygonal plane to utilize for my templates. So I'll click on the plane. You'll notice on the right hand side that it has a height and width of 1 and 1, and we want to set those both to 24. And we want to set both of our subdivisions height and subdivisions width to 1 and press the Enter key. Please remember to press the Enter key by the alpha pad on your keyboard rather than the numpad on the right hand side. When you press the numpad on the right hand side and press the Enter key, such as you may see over here, you'll notice that my cursor is still located over here. So if I jump right into utilizing, let's say, the Move tool or Rotate tool, it automatically will start typing in those letters inside this box over to the right hand side, rather than if I press the Enter key by the alpha letters and characters, it commits that change, and then I can hop right into the Rotate panel, which is my E key or the W key for the Move tool, etc. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is hop over into my Hypershade Perspective. If you don't see it on the left-hand side, you can always go to Panels, Save Layouts, and choose Hypershade Perspective from the list of choices over here on the right-hand side. So in the Hypershade Perspective, the very first thing that we're going to do is create ourselves a new Lambert. Oops, I created two extra new Lamberts. Oops, let me delete one of those. So the new Lambert that I've created, I would like to make a change to it. And so in order for the change to actually appear, I either double click on the new Lambert, press Control A on my keyboard, which will open up the Attributes panel, or notice on the right hand side I have two different tabs, Attribute Panel and Channel Panel, and I would like to go to the Attribute Editor. So the first thing I'm going to do is rename my new Lambert from Lambert 2 to Template Shades. And you'll notice that the color is this gray, which is fine. I'm going to click on the checker box to the right of the word color, and this will launch a Create Render Node window, in which case I want to choose File from here. Once I press File, not a whole lot changes. However, on the right hand side in the Hypershader, you'll see a yellow folder. We're going to click on that, and it's going to ask us where exactly our files are located. So I'm going to choose my Source Images folder, which is where all of our images need to be residing in order for Maya to automatically find them. So let's see. I believe what we are going to be building it off of is going to be the color map. So we're going to utilize the color map as our first template. Okay, now there's two different ways of assigning this to our image plane that we have located here. One is to select the image plane, and then you can right click and hold on top of the image plane and go all the way down to Assign Existing Material and choose what we called it, Template Shades. You won't see any change taking place until you turn on hardware shading. Hardware shading can be turned on by going to Shading and choosing Hardware Shading, or more effectively, pressing the number 6 key on your keyboard. The next thing we need to do is actually rotate our template up into the upright position. I'm going to hop back into my channel box to ensure that I'm not rotating it partially or short of exactly 90 degrees. So I'm going to type in 90 and once again press the Enter key by the alphas so that way it commits that change. And the next thing I'm going to do is I need to create two different templates. They look exactly the same, but one that helps build out the front versus one that builds out the depth. So I'm going to duplicate this template, and I can do so very simply by pressing Control D on my keyboard. Control D is duplicate. You can also go to the Edit Duplicate menu. When you choose either of those methods, neither of the duplicated options that I just created are going to give you a visual that another one exists. However, you can look up to the upper right corner in your channel box where it says P-Plane 2, Or if you automatically have the tool turned on that you're going to use to separate the duplicated copy, you can simply start rotating the process, and you'll see that the rotation tool will automatically give me the two that I'm looking for. And once again, I'm going to start the rotation to ensure that I'm moving in the right direction. And then I'm going to come over to my channel box and type in exactly 90 degrees. Depending on how your planes were created, you very well may have to change yours -90. It just depends on the settings that you have on your device prior to creating those objects. The next thing we're going to do is hop into the four-way view. The four-way view is the second icon on the left-hand side of the screen in the lower half of the toolbars. Now the four-way view once again is going to bring me to these two gray panels on the lower side, and nothing appears. And once again, I need to tell those views that I also need to turn on my hardware shading. You want both of these to look exactly the same. The left side is going to be your front view, the right side is going to be your side view. You'll notice in the bottom of your screen right here that it says side. For example, it says side right there. And then the side of the front, it says front down there. So the goal right now is to zoom out a little bit. You can see that there's a dark solid line going across these, and so I would like to build my my archway at ground level. I've got both of my templates selected, and I did so in the perspective view by clicking. And now utilizing just the arrow, not the box, but the arrow, I'm going to drag these up at the same time to ensure that they're both being dropped at ground level from both the front as well as the side view. Make sure that you're looking at it from either the orthographic front or the orthographic side view, not from the perspective view, because you don't have a good perspective as to where it is stopped. The next thing we're going to do is add both of these items to their own layer. Now, because both of my objects are still selected, and if they weren't, I would click, shift, click on both of them. One will have a white outline, one will have a green outline, suggesting that this is the last selected item. Look to the lower right side of your channel box, and in the lower section there will be a blue sphere in this third section of the channel box. The top section is your translate, rotate, scale. The second section talks about the inputs such as the subdivisions, height and width, and the third section at the bottom here is where you have the layers. So we're going to click on the blue sphere, and because both of our items are already selected, this blue sphere basically states that you will add the already selected objects to that layer. Double click on layer 1 and a window will pop up, and we will call this our templates layer. And choose save. The goal here now is that if I click off and I turn on and off the visibility, you'll see both of those will disappear. The third column over, there's a blank field there, and if you press it once, it'll go into transparency mode, and if you press it twice, it will go into R for render mode. Now, if you click off, click on, you'll notice that neither of those templates are selectable or swipeable. Thus, they will not move when we start building our objects out. I did fail to mention that I moved these backwards into the negative direction, about -12 degrees. So I'm going to turn off my render briefly just to show you that when I select this one, again, you can utilize the arrow for this to move it backwards, just don't move it up and down. And I moved it about -12, -13. And likewise for this one, I move this one, let's see, -15. The distance that you move it back is arbitrary in terms of how you're going to model out the building. It does not need to be exact. However, the templates that we created, when we originally went into the inputs for these, we originally created them as a height and width of 24 by 24, and that does need to be precise for scaling purposes. I'm going to come back to the lower section of my layers and turn on the transparency and click it a second time to turn on the renderer. And once again, now the templates are not selectable. The unique part about this chapter is that we're not going to build our templates utilizing a cube. Instead, we're going to use a tool called the Create Polygon tool. In the upper left corner, we're going to change our drop-down list to modeling if it's not already there. And then we're going to go to the Mesh Tools menu and go to the Create Polygon tool. Now, the way the Create Polygon tool works is that you need to be in an orthographic view. Do not attempt to use the Create Polygon tool in the perspective view. It does not have depth perception, so it must do it from an orthographic view. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hover over this lower left side, which is the front orthographic view, and I'm going to start modeling out what I believe is going to be the shape of my tower. You'll see that I've clicked 4 times in order to create this rectangular shape right here, and I'm going to press the Enter key. A couple visuals just occurred. One is that you cannot see through it, and two, that it is black. And so I'm going to pop out of my front view and look at this from the perspective view once again. And when the black is showing from what should be the front view, that means it's inside out. If you kind of tumble to the side, you'll see that the back side of that box I just created is gray, which means that it once again is inside out. So with that one object selected, we're going to come up to the top here and go into the mesh menu and choose reverse. Sorry, mesh display, and choose reverse. When you do this, it'll give you the pixelated view as if it were in face mode, and then when you click on it and click off, you'll see that it now is gray. Real quick, I'm going to bounce back into our Hypershader, and I'm going to decrease the transparency on our Lambert 1. So I'm going to double click on Lambert 1 from my library and decrease the transparency so I can see through it. And if you'd even like to change the color of it, by all means go for it. The color that appears in the upper left corner of this box is the color that will stay. Once you move your mouse away, the color box goes away. Okay, and so you can see I've already changed the transparency of it. I'm going to go back to the four-way view, spacebar over it, and we can see what it looks like. So you can see I've kind of made a very rough layout of what it looks like. In brief, I'm going to insert a few edge loops. So Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop. And I know I need to add an edge loop going across right here as well as right here to start the shaping of it. And I likely need a few more going through the center section over here. So I'm going to add in 2 more edge loops. As soon as you're done with the Insert Edge Loop tool, make sure you go back to the Q key, otherwise known as the selection arrow, so that way you don't keep adding more loops around and around. With the Insert Edge Loop tool, as you may recall, you must click on a vertical line in order for a horizontal line to appear, and vice versa. So now that I've gone to my selection arrow, my arrow is back to my normal arrow, which means I'm not adding any more edge loops. I'm going to right click and go into Vertex Mode, and I'm going to do a few swipes real quick to change the shape of my vertices, so that way they have different alignment. And I'm going to toggle between the W and the R key, which is the move in the scale tool. It does not need to be precise, it needs to be close. And actually I believe that these probably will be better served down here. So I'm going to just swipe a few of these and move them over. And these I'm going to make a little bit wider. Okay, so it gives me kind of a rough placement of them. If you would like to just move one vertex at a time, by all means you can. Just swipe around it or click on it, either way. And this one I'll move in a little bit. All right, next thing, we're going to go back into object mode. So right click and hold takes you to object mode. I'm going to go through the rough-in for the next few steps and kind of show you a visual without talking, and we'll skip through and continue making different portions of this archway using the Create Polygon tool. Once again, the Create Polygon tool is a flat item, so there is no depth to it. Once it's all created, we can go through and extrude it through. Mesh Tools, Create Polygon tool. I'm going to get pretty close to where I last ended my last one. I don't need to be on top of it because eventually I will actually go through and merge these together. The next thing about the Create Polygon tool is that some would like to kind of click all along the way to create the topology exactly. And while that's great and all, we need to make sure that our archway is quadratic in nature, meaning that every face has 4 sides and 4 vertices, no more, no less. And so that is critical for 1, exporting into a game engine, and 2, printing for a 3D model. So while I would like to follow the topology to some extent, I also need to be conscious of how many vertices I put on the one side that I need to then match up the vertices to the other side. When you get to the side over here, you'll notice that it's hard to kind of see the different vertices. And so you'll notice if you click and hold, you can drag these vertices into place before you release, and that's when it's captured. And now I've got a number of even vertices, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the right side, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left side. Press the Enter key and you can kind of see where we're at. The next thing we're going to do is move the vertices around into vertex mode, and I can make minor adjustments as needed if I feel it needs to be adjusted a little bit. Go back into object mode, and then the other tool that we're going to use is referred to as the multi-cut tool. It used to be called the split polygon tool. So now with the multi-cut tool, you'll see that as I'm hovering over these different locations, Maya is trying really hard to snap these vertices together, in which we're going to allow it to do. So I'm going to start on the left. You can see it's made contact, turned it yellow, release on the right, and press the Enter key. And now I have a solid line going across. And likewise, I'm going to do the same thing on the left, and then release it over to the right side and press the Enter key. And that's all I can really connect at this point, because that's the 4 on the left and the 4 on the right. However, moving forward, if I choose to connect some more, I'm better off going into the Insert Edgeloop tool, which again is click on a vertical, you'll get a horizontal. And we'll do this a few times. And then eventually we're going to do a vertical one as well. So I might as well put that into play right now, and you can see how it goes through. When you're all done, press the Q key. Now that you've pressed the Q key, we're going to continue on and combine these two items together. So I'm going to right click and go into object mode, and you'll notice that these two objects, while they are separated objects, we need to connect them. However, before doing so, if I shift click on both of these, you'll see that this top one has a vertical line going through it as we had just added it in, yet the bottom one has nothing to connect a vertex to. So the next thing we're going to do before we can connect them or combine them is to insert an edge loop. So I'm going to click on a horizontal line to get myself an edge loop, and I'll add it right in there. I'm going to go back to the Q key to turn off the tool. Now you can see that both of these items have enough vertices that I'm able to connect them together. So I need to go into object mode and select both of these items together all at one time. With them both selected, we're going to go to Mesh and choose Combine. And then I'm going to zoom in even closer and view the vertices. So I'm going to swipe the two end vertices that I have over here. Go to Mesh Tools. Go to Edit Mesh and click on Merge to Center. I'm going to repeat that process by selecting the next two that are nearby one another, Edit Mesh, Merge to Center, and the last two, select Edit Mesh, Merge to Center. Now, when I go back into object mode, this whole object is one solid object. So before moving on, I'm also going to take the time to realign some of my vertices, so that way it starts taking care of some of these holes before I move forward. So I'm going to shift select several of these vertices, utilizing the Move tool, and kind of move them out of the way. In addition, I'm going to also move the ones that are in this gaping hole area and see if we can adjust those as well. Fantastic. So now I basically have created the outline to this object right here. Everything is quadratic in nature. Even though this particular face, and I will identify right here, looks like it might be a triangle, if you right click and go into vertex mode, you'll see it has 1, 2, 3, 4 vertices, which does make it quadratic. So to move forward, I'm actually going to switch over and utilize the edge tool, or the edge selector. So I've got two edges selected on the top, and oddly, instead of using the create polygon tool for this next step, I'm actually going to use the extrude tool. So I'm going to extrude it utilizing the icon up here, which is extrude, and pull this item up. I'm going to continue with this. Let's go all the way up to this point right here. And then I will adjust my vertices so that way I'm not going off the side of the building over here. And likewise, I'm going to adjust this one as well, so it is up here at the top. Go back into edge mode and select both of these vertices and extrude it going up. Whenever you extrude, you always get some neat tools to scale at the same time, as well as move. And then I'll extrude it again. I'll take the last moment here to adjust the placement of the vertices using the Move tool. And nothing is overlapping one another, and all faces are still quadratic. Likewise, I'll select the edge on the left-hand side, extrude it, extrude and move, extrude and move. I'm going to go back in the Merge tool and make adjustments as needed. I'm going to use the multi-cut tool to take some emphasis out of that little area right there. With 2 clicks, press the Enter key. And then I will swipe and move once again. I'll come back and do small detail work later. At this point, I'm going to continue modeling out utilizing either the Create Polygon tool or the Extrude tool. And then we'll catch up when everything is modeled out. Welcome back. So now I've completed modeling out the archway, and you can see on the edges that my edges are extra thick, identifying that these are outside edges. If we pop into perspective mode, you'll notice that my object is completely flat all the way around. So the next step is going to build out the depth of this object. First thing we're going to do is I make sure that your object is in object mode, and then we're going to use the Extrude tool. And I'm going to go into my 4-way view before I get to that point. So I'm going to adjust the placement. You can notice in the lower right side in the side view of where my object is located. And I'm looking at the front side of my object from the perspective and from the front orthographic view. So therefore I'm going to place this on the front side of the side view. And now I'm going to use my Extrude tool and drag it in the backwards fashion. And you can see from the lower right side where I'm moving the actual Move tool that I'm going as deep as the side view allows me to go. Right click and go back into object mode. And now my archway is basically modeled out. At this point, the key to this particular chapter is to notch out or to break out elements of the archway where it needs to be pushed in a little bit. In particular, the area in the lower right side inside corner, lower left side outside corner, and then in the black zone through the template where you can see it becomes much darker in this little nook right here, down on the right side and on the left hand side. So one of the ways that we can go about doing this is to adjust or shift the existing edges that are already existing in the actual object. We don't want to delete any faces, we don't want to delete any vertices, because everything as of this point was made quadratically. In order for me to make any kind of indentation or modification to the outside edges on this corner, I'm going to need to have some vertices and edges going down the middle of the archway, specifically along the x-axis. So I'll do that by going to Mesh Tools and clicking on Insert Edgeloop. As always, click on a horizontal line if you would like a vertical line, and it does go all the way around my object, which is ideal. I'm going to repeat the same process on the back side in case I want to damage out or indent the back portion of my archway as well. Those lines that were just created go all the way through the whole archway on the inside, outside, and all the way around. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is make sure that we're in edge mode, which we are, and then I'm going to double click on my Move tool. And when I go in the Move tool, please notice that the default setting is World, and as you go through and make changes to the Move tool, notice in the upper section of the Move tool there's always a reset option. We can always bring the Move tool back to where it belongs. So we're going to modify the axis of orientation, and we're going to set it to component. And you'll notice that immediately something already switched about our object because the Move tool flipped into a different direction. So the goal here is to select a few of these vertical edges that we would like to push into the archway a little bit. So that way it's not in perfect Lego fashion, perfectly square or quadratic, even though there's indentations that are being made that make it look like it's not a stable archway, it's still very squared based on the front and on the side views. So again, using the move tool, and we've set it to component mode, we're going to be able to drag on this arrow, pulling it in the backwards fashion. And you'll notice based on as I tumble that those edges became much softer. Can really kind of notch it out a little bit. I'll repeat the same process for the underbelly of the top portion here. Move some of these in, select some of these edges, and use the move tool and adjust accordingly. So this is really just kind of notching it in. And you can see how it's kind of breaking it apart. So that way if I were an actual airplane flying through, you can kind of see that there's some depth being given to this area right here. Likewise, I'll repeat the same process in the lower left side of the right column. Go into my move tool, which is also still set to component mode, and push these in a little bit. If you feel like additional damage needs to happen to make it look like it's breaking in a little earlier, feel free to adjust some of the other vertices along the way and edges. So it's kind of smoothing this side out so it looks like it's a little bit more damaged. Likewise, I probably will push this in a little bit more, and then I will soften the blow by adjusting the one that's just behind it a little bit. Kind of move it in. So that's the process of going through the damaging. Obviously for an assignment I probably would spend some more time adjusting these even further, or even more so possibly going into the vertex mode, adjusting the vertices versus the whole edges. It'll appear like it's more damaged. Fantastic, and continue on. The next step is to actually apply to this object the texture. So I'm going to right click and go into object mode and select my object, and if we were to go into the Hypershader, I need to create myself a new Lambert. I always create a surface and assign the file to the surface. So I double clicked on my new Lambert. This is going to be my archway. Let's just do that. Archway tech. And we're going to click on the checker box next to the word color, choose file, click on the yellow box, and for this one we are actually going to assign it the color map. So I shall select my object, right click and hold, go down to existing material and choose archway tech. Okay, so you see that this object is turned completely black, which is one of two potential options. One is the number 7 key was selected, and that means my lights are on and my default lighting's not working. However, that's not the case, so I'm going to go back to pressing my 6 key. When the object turns all black like this, or even portions of the archway turn black and different faces, it means that the normals of the archway are reversed. So you can check it out by going to in object mode, going to display polygons and turning on face normals, and you will see that no normals are actually popping out, but if you get in real close you'll see a whole bunch of little dots. If I go into wireframe mode, you'll see all the normals, and the normals are all pointing on the inside. It's just based on the direction in which I chose to extrude the object, so they're flipped inside out. So to change that, I went back to the number 6 key. We can, with the object selected, we can go to mesh display and choose reverse. And this takes it back out now, and all the little nubbies of the face normals are all pointing outside. So once again, I'm going to go back to display, go back to polygons, and I'm going to turn off face normals to get rid of the green lines. Likewise, I also want to make sure that my move tool is open once again, and I click on reset tool and it takes me back to world, meaning that my axis of orientation for each of the items I selected is back to the standard X, Y, and Z axes. So the initial display of the texture on my archway is not ideal. This is my interpretation of what it should look like. So let's get rid of the move tool and move this off to the side. So the next step I'm going to go through is open up my UV editor. UV editor is located right here. It's very difficult to see the wireframes on this. So if you go to image, dim image, this will gray it out. And then this basically shows you Maya's scramble for attempting to assign the texture where it doesn't really understand the face normals and the UV layout. So the next step at this point is to have my object selected in object mode, and it is, and then go to UV, click on the options box next to planar. This menu pops up, and the first time that I do this, I'm going to project it from the Z axis, which is from the front. And so you can see when I project it from the Z axis, I'm able to reassign the size of the object based on the front display. And we'll get it just perfect. Okay, so in the lower section, you'll see that I've got some white spots appearing on the front side. So I'm going to take care of that right now by right-clicking and going into UV mode and selecting these vertices and just giving them a slight little tug to the right. And by doing so, a very slight amount, there's very little pixelation taking place. And I've got one more vertex that's hanging out. And you can see it real closely right here. This vertex is on the outside, so you're seeing a white spot actually show up on the actual texture. So I'm going to do a slight little tug on that as well and move it over. All right, so the next step is going to be to go into orthographic. We're going to go into side view, and I'm going to right click and go into face mode. And I'm going to try and do my best to not select anything on the front of my object because I just projected it from the Z-axis. So I want to make sure I select all of the side and top faces so I can do a secondary projection. So I'm going to go back into perspective mode and see what all I selected. So you can see by my quick swift selection, I've over selected some of the faces that I've tried to basically break down a little bit. So I'm going to unselect some of these since they're doing a fine job picking up on the textures that were projected by the front projection. Next thing I'm going to do is go to UV, go to planar projection, click on the options box, and we're going to do this from the X-axis, which means from the side, and choose project. Once again, this is my UV texture editor window, so I'm going to go through and scale this down, scale it narrower, and then move it on top of the side view and continue with my scaling efforts. And when I look at my object in perspective mode, my side looks good and my front looks good and the other side looks good. A few of these faces I'll have to go back and reproject when we're all done. So the last thing I need to go through in face mode is select the top faces. Now this is a process since I have already projected it from the front and from the side. I cannot easily just swiftly swipe the faces. I actually need to go through and individually select the faces that I can see from the y-axis. Be sure that you don't swipe, because if you swipe, you will select the faces on the underside and or from different axes angles that we're not looking to select. So we'll select those. As well as the underbelly. That looks like it's coming from the y-axis. Hold down my shift key. I'll select a few more of these faces that are definitely on the y-axis. Looks pretty solid at this point, so maybe some of these down here. Shift click on these. Okay, so I'm going to go to planar or UV, planar projection, and we're going to project these from the y-axis and press project. Likewise, we'll go back over to the UV texture editor window. We'll drag these up and over and scale. So that looks pretty much on par. Want to make sure that there's no white spots. So this is the process of applying a texture to a three-dimensional object. I'm going to reselect some of these x-axis side view ones that need to be reprojected. So we'll go back to UV, planar projection from the x-axis, project. They're massive in nature. And we'll take this over here, down to the bottom where we grabbed these from. You don't want to go too small because then it will appear stretched, but yet you don't want it to make it too big because then it too will look disproportionate. Much better. So looking good down there. There we go. All right. So that is the process of applying textures throughout the whole object. Moving forward, a few of these items are still turned white. So I need to go through and meticulously adjust the UV placements of these, utilizing the simple little move tool. Oops. Need to swipe since we're three-dimensional. So that took care of those. Any other spots? All right. So that is the process of damaging and projecting your object from different angles. I have to redo those. If you have any questions, please contact me during office hours for this portion. Thank you very much. The final step to texturing this particular object is to add a bump map to the object. If we were to select this object in object mode and look at this archway in our renderer, which is one of these clapboards, we would see that the object looks pretty flat. It doesn't necessarily look realistic. So what we want to do is actually apply to this a bump map so it looks a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to click on this icon right here in my render window, and that basically is going to save this picture. So both frame one and the other one are default pictures, so you can see the difference as we go through and add in a bump map. So I'm going to open up the Hypershader. Here's our Hypershader here. And inside here I have my arch temp or texture. And what we're going to do is go down to where it says bump mapping. So let's click on bump mapping and we're going to apply a file to it. Now by default it sets up so that way it goes into this right side attribute editor. You can click on file 3 at the top because that's what the bump map is looking for, and then you should recognize the yellow folder on the right hand side. And so there's a couple different ways that we can go about doing the bump. This one we already have a file created that appears as so like this, and so we're going to utilize that file for a bump. Now you'll notice the bump map is basically gray and white or black and white, and so what it does is it picks up on the color tones. The darker the intonation, it looks like the stone archway is being chiseled in, hence the areas that you see right here. And the lighter the coloring of the bump map, it looks like the brickwork is actually in good condition, to say like it's popping out, meaning that it hasn't been chiseled away. And so because our object already has this texture applied to it, you might already see the bump map taking effect on the actual object. Okay, so we can go back through our renderer and re-render this object, and you'll see that this is now what it looks like. It's a little intense, so we're going to have to go through the process of diminishing the bump map a little bit here. So to diminish the bump map, let's spacebar over this. To diminish the bump map, we have the bump map already opened. It's bump 2D, and you can see you can modify the intensity of the actual bump depth right here. And so the renderer gives you the best idea of what it looks like, so I'll re-render it, and this basically is what it's looking like in its current state. So I can save this. So you'll see starting at the very beginning of this process, this is what the archway looked without a bump map. And then it looked overly bumped when it was at a full intensity. And now we're looking at it in a much calmer light here. And that is the method of adding a bump map to an object. Hopefully that makes sense. You're able to modify it. If we go back into the Hypershader, if you got lost, we have the archway tech. We added a bump right here. It becomes file 3. This is where we added it from. And then we can modify the bump 2D. I've got it set to 0.4 at the current time. Hope that makes sense. Take care.